Obviously going to have an extension of time to the Article 50 process, which is completely sensible, by the way. But the question is, what do we use that time for? And what we should use it for is to come to a clear set of decisions about Brexit, which we've avoided up to now and which we've got to do.
At the moment, as things stand, legally, you'll know as a lawyer, we crash out with no deal.
Yeah, but the Europeans don't want that, and to be fair to the Prime Minister, she doesn't want it. So it won't happen. I mean, a no deal is not our challenge. Our challenge is how do we make sure whatever we have by way of an extension, and I think it's probably best to have 9 months or a year extension, whatever you have by way of extension, make it count, and make it count by having a plan for it that allows Parliament to reach a conclusive opinion on the central Brexit question, soft or hard.
Let's deal with the allegations that you've been talking to Europeans, President Macron, telling them to stand firm. Is that true?
It isn't true. You know, it comes from the sort of Tory source. So now they want to say, no, these Europeans would have given us what we wanted, but unfortunately Tony Blair came along and ruined it all.
Help me out here, though. What conversations have you been having?
So I've been saying is something completely different to President Macron, to other European leaders. What I've said to them is, if we get to the point where Britain thinks again, because I believe there will come a point where the country seriously wonders whether this is a wise course to rip ourselves out.
Britain thinks again means you go back and ask for people to vote on the same thing.
Exactly. So we end up thinking, you know, let's consider this again before we take this huge, irrevocable step with our future and our destiny. If Britain thinks again, Europe should think again. Because truthfully, the underlying issues driving Brexit are the underlying issues in European politics. And it's not just our knowledge of Brexit has undergone a transformation in the last 2.5 years. European politics has undergone a transformation.
So come on, unpick that for me then. Are you talking about freedom of movement? Are you talking about that ending in Europe?
I think you could get an agreement from Europe that puts freedom of movement in its proper context and understands that, for example, you shouldn't have influxes of labour that then undercut the wages of local workers, things like this. All the
So
problems.
how does that work? So it ends freedom of movement as we know it?
No, it doesn't end freedom of movement. It keeps freedom of movement, but keeps it operating in a way that's fair and just.
You would concede that as things stand, freedom of movement is not fair and just then?
I think, look, I personally have less problem with freedom of movement than many people have, but I think you've got to answer the concerns of people. I think freedom of movement on the whole is a good thing, but I think you can deal with the specific anxieties people have. And you know, one of the things that's changed about Britain these last 2.5 years, we finally know what these European migrants do.
You're batting both ways. I don't understand this message to the EU then. If people were to vote again, would you be saying, in this new reformed Europe, freedom of movement, as we see it today, does not exist?
Well, you wouldn't say that does not exist, is putting it too starkly, should be reformed and qualified to meet the concerns that aren't just British concerns, but are concerns right across Europe.
And that would mean, what, only people with work or only people with visas, or what does that mean?
It would mean, for example, other countries already do this, by the way. So if you go to Belgium and you come as freedom of movement, and after a couple of 2 or 3 months you can't support yourself, they put you back out again.
So why didn't we?
Well, we could have done this, but we chose over a long period of time, frankly, to prioritise the needs of our economy. Because, by the way, most of these people come and do jobs that aren't taking the jobs of British people. However, the point that I'm making, you started by asking me what I said to the Europeans. My statements to them have all been around, if we think again, you should also think again. And I found a pretty good reception for that message, actually. Now, at this moment in time, we're not in that stage. The key question today is not whether you have another referendum or you don't have another referendum. That is for a later time now. The key question today is, can you finally get this government to understand that the only way you're going to bring resolution of Brexit is to put before Parliament the actual options? Soft Brexit, hard Brexit, no Brexit, or soft or hard with a confirmatory referendum.
You know, the image of Britain for outsiders is a country that is utterly confused. We've got a German minister calling her cat Brexit because it doesn't know whether it's going in or out. You see that image?
Yeah. I mean, I'm afraid this is what we've done to ourselves with this process. But the only way of curing that idea of the country is to have a clear strategy for getting out of it.
But you're contributing to this. I mean, you do not have a mandate. You're not an MP. You're not in the Lords. You're not an appointed negotiator. And yet you are perceived as being the person that is undermining the democracy of this country.
How am I undermining it? Emily, the fact that this government is in this state of dysfunction, I mean, disarray is too small a word for it, and then they turn around and they start blaming me for their negotiating problems. I mean, they're the government. I've not even been in power for 11 years. And what I'm saying, by the way, to people privately in Europe is what I'm saying publicly.
The perception, though, as you know, aired on our programme last night, is that politicians in a broadly Remainer parliament look on the public with pity, as if they've just made the wrong choice, and it is their job to help them correct that choice.
Yeah, I know, but I'm afraid this is, honestly, it's the problem with modern politics, is that we got into this situation where people say to me the whole time, look, these MPs, they're a disgrace, they're just squabbling amongst themselves. They're not. They're doing their day job. They're doing what they're supposed to do. I mean, Theresa May is saying to the British people, if you back my deal, if only Parliament put aside its petty squabbles and back my deal, all this Brexit thing would go away, we'd have closure of the argument, we'd all sail through to a nice future. It isn't right. It's not what would happen. Her deal resolves nothing. And what the MPs are doing is actually what they should do. They're looking at the detail and they're saying Northern Ireland's a mess and the future relationship's a mystery, and why on earth are we going to push the country down this path that's not in the country's interests?
Alan Johnson told me that when he worked in a supermarket, the motto was, the customer's always right. And as an MP, he takes that seriously. If the public tell you something, you act on what they've told you. Do you go with that? Is the customer always right?
You know, I think the job of an MP is a little more nuanced than that. The job of, in a situation where you're talking about, we all agree this, right? Whether you're pro-Brexit, anti-Brexit, you agree this is the most important decision since the Second World War, right? How important is that? It's going to decide the future of the whole country for a long time to come. No, members of Parliament owe their constituents their own judgment. They shouldn't just say to them, well, tell us what you want, we'll do it.
Should MPs then tell the public when they're wrong?
They should be honest with the public. What they should say to them, here is what the options mean. Why are we in this place? Because Theresa May has taken this kind of extraordinary narrow view of this situation and just said, right, here is my deal. If you don't accept it, then you're basically defying the will of the people, you're being unpatriotic. Instead, what she should be saying is, okay, here is what Brexit really does mean. It can mean this if you go for a soft option, it can mean that if you go for a hard option. What do you want?
But you've already said, you go back to the public and you say, these are the choices available, soft or hard. Now you've heard from the public, many people who did vote leave say, we'll take no deal. Actually, frankly. So do you go back to them and say, you're wrong?
No, I think you go back to them and say, fine, you want no deal, but are you telling me people voted for no deal in June 2016? I don't think so. So my whole point is the moment you start explaining these options is when you will eventually get led to going back to the people. If it comes to an actual proposition and we ask them to confirm whether they really want that or not, then I think that will end up as actually quite a popular solution to this, and it's the thing that will bring closure, because that decision in the end will have to be final.
We're in a mess right now. If ever there was a moment when this country needed spiritual guidance, it is probably now. I wonder whether, as a religious man, it is in your prayers now, whether you ask for help from God on this.
But you're kidding me, right? No, I mean, look, I've always used to say this to people, you can be as religious as you like, but the thing about praying to God is he doesn't tell you what the level of the minimum wage is. And I don't know what God's view on Brexit is, and I think it's not a sensible inquiry to have. So, no, I'm afraid this is one for the temporal and not the spiritual. We're going to have to decide what we want.